Hi, everyone, and welcome to another ZoomInfo webinar. Thank you for joining us. The webinar today is titled Why Top CIOs Rely on Go-to-Market Intelligence to Drive Revenue. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to kick things off with some housekeeping items first, and then we'll go into introing our amazing panel that we have today. So really quickly, safe harbor statement. ZoomInfo is a publicly traded company. This presentation may contain forward-looking statements. Any buying decision should be made based only upon currently available products and offerings. This is our complete safe harbor statement here for your review if you'd like. All right, so some other housekeeping items. If you're experiencing any technical issues while watching this webinar, please let us know using the Q&A chat. It's in the chat boxes in the top left corner of your screen. This is a web-based platform, so if you do experience any glitchiness or connectivity issues, feel free to just refresh your window. That should help. We will also be sending out the recording within 48 hours after we conclude today, so you can always watch the on-demand, which will not have any of those connectivity or glitchy issues in it. But if you are experiencing any other issues outside of that we can help with, feel free to use that Q&A chat box to let us know. We have a team member monitoring that today. Also use the Q&A chat to let us know if you have any questions for our panelists. We have an awesome lineup today. They're going to have, it's as if you are a fly on the wall with a CIO conversation. This is a great opportunity to ask all of those questions that you always wish you could have or could be in those meetings with. So feel free. We're going to have some time at the end of our session to answer those questions live. Again, we are recording this. So like I mentioned, you'll get this within 48 hours. So keep an eye on your inbox. And then we have a survey on the right side of your screen. Just want to make sure that we are producing these webinars to the best of our ability. And so we would love for you all to let us know how we can better them. If there's other content that you would like us to cover within this space or within these topics, feel free to let us know. There's an open text field. You can submit that survey at any point throughout the webinar and at the end. Okay. So like I mentioned, we have an awesome lineup this week for this session today, a panel of fantastic CIOs and heads of IT. So to kick things off, we have Pratini, and she is the CIO of ZScaler. So super excited to have her here. We also have Brian. He's the Vice President, Head of IT at GitLab. Thank you for being here. We have Anisha, CIO of Toast. And then our ZoomInfo favorite is Chetna, our very own CIO here at ZoomInfo. Thank you all for joining us as panelists. I know the audience is super excited to hear from some heads of the IT world and heads of the data world. And I'm going to pass it over to Chetna to get through and get kicking off this conversation.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and a very warm welcome to Praniti, Brian, Anisha, and thank you to our audience for joining us on the webinar today. So without further ado, I would like to kick us off today with our very first question. As we all know, that COVID-19 pandemic has transformed our lives and our perspectives at work as well as at home significantly, and in many cases permanently. Work-life integration has become critical to our existence, and every organization has responded slightly differently to the situation. But needless to say that CIOs across the globe have been instrumental in steering the company operations in the new virtual environment that we're all in today. So with that, I would like to, and when I ask the questions, I'll start with Praniti, Brian, and then Anisha. So my very first question is, how did the pandemic change IT's position at your organization? Not just as a business partner, but also as a strategic driver, and specifically in relation to data. So we're all talking about data here. So how did that transform in your organization? Praniti.
Sure, Chetna, and I'm not sure how I got picked first, but well, I'll take a stab at it.
We'll reverse the order next time.
Listen, I'm going to talk a little bit on the broader level. On a broader level, COVID has seen two very pertinent shifts to our businesses. One of them has been around this really fast movement towards digitization of all our customer interactions. Whether this was due to remote workforce or it was due to the way consumers were now buying or interacting, specifically as I think about ZScaler in the realm of healthcare, pharma, financial services, professional services. And the second trend that I think, which is also important, is the buyer's journey, which went to 100% virtual. There were no prospect dinners, there was no field events, there were no in-person company conferences, and the list goes on. What that meant was everything went virtual. Both of these scenarios led to a much larger focus on driving with data and securing the data. Data became one of the most important, while it always should have been very important, but it became the most important item for us to kind of dive deep into to drive the outcomes. And we just did not have the experiential interactions in person anymore. And so that's really where I think it impacted IT and our data teams the most. There was just a lot of demand on trying to on all of our engagements.
Thank you. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, GitLab, or you may or may not know, GitLab has always been an all-remote company. So even though we were affected by COVID in lots of ways still, the whole mindset around GitLab has always been remote first. So I don't think we were impacted from our business in putting in the sense of data as much as others, right? So for us, it's as far as data is concerned, our biggest challenge is really just more about making sure that we have quality data, working in an async fashion. I think that's probably the thing that I would point out the most is that when you have all of a sudden your workforce is really distributed, how do you work in such a way that allows you to make good decisions based on data analytics? And for us, fortunately, we'd already sort of had that in our DNA to work in an asynchronous fashion where you're not always going to have meetings. Praniti was talking a little bit about, on the go-to-market side, how, all of a sudden you didn't have customer visits, you didn't have user conferences or local regional customer events. So there was the aspect there. We did experience the same thing where it's like, okay, how do we collect the data? How do we ensure that we're engaging with our customers in the most efficient way? And so for us in the data journey, we were already in the process of getting better data analytics, remote or not, in the COVID world. I don't think the fundamentals really change all that much from a data perspective in COVID, other than it probably accelerated the way people thought about how to collect that data and work with the data. So I think those were the biggest, I would say, things that you might have to think about from a data perspective. And I think actually it really translates to really the way you operate all technology. So that's sort of my viewpoint on it. And I think that it's probably been a really good thing in the long run for everybody to think about how you can work more efficiently, how you can work async, how you can get teams together and not be dependent on sitting in a room all the time.
Did the perception of the IT leaders or the role of a CIO as a business partner changed with that pandemic at all, or you think it was pretty much the same?
I think it changed a lot. I think that it provided an opportunity for technology leaders to really lean in and anytime you have this massive change, right, and you got to get people productive and people are going to need different ways of working. I think that the more reliant that certain organizations were on being in the office provided an opportunity for technology leaders even more, right? So we're all in the tech space. So I would at least imagine that our leadership was needed, but our change was probably not as big as, say, if you were in the semiconductor space or manufacturing space, right? Well, that was even more so. So I think that the good thing that happened here is it's forced all of us as technology leaders to rise to the occasion and think about how we're going to do things differently going forward. And it's a new era. I know we're coming out of COVID, but it's a new era for all of us.
Agreed. So Anisha, moving over to you, if you could answer that question and also just highlight some of the difference in go-to-market data that you saw. Like, were the executives looking at data differently? Like, sales leader working remotely versus not, or any different kind of data and analytics that you had to produce in the new world as you as you went through the COVID-19 situation for Toast specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think Toast is in a really interesting position through COVID. So for those of you who are not familiar with what Toast does, we make point of sale software for restaurants and other SaaS software to allow restaurants to run their operations. And so obviously it was an industry very dramatically hit, especially initially when COVID first hit. And so, there's the aspect of being a CIO and sort of enabling remote work internally for your workforce, which a lot of us done. It's tried and tested ground, like we all did that, got people up and working, which is fine. But I think specifically for Toast, I don't know how we would have managed through those turbulent times without data, right? And so we made very consequential decisions on what new products to build and invest based on the digital transformation we were seeing in our customers as customers or restaurants moved from being primarily on-site dining operations to be doing online delivery and digital dine-in and takeout and integrating with third-party delivery partners. We literally built products in weeks to help restaurants survive and sort of navigate through COVID, right? And understanding how those products were doing in the field, understanding just business performance in general, understanding what we needed to tweak and how and where to navigate just our own health through the pandemic got pretty critical. It could not have been done, with data, without data, right? And so I think it was just as critical as some of the key kind of products and innovation we launched to help the company survive and navigate through COVID.
Makes sense. So did it change the perception of a CIO or on the executive table being not just a business partner, but also being a strategic driver? Do you think that impacted a little bit of that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been there 14 months, and I'm their first CIO. So they certainly felt the need for the role and for the function. Mm-hmm. And, we definitely feel like we're strong business partners, whether it's working with the head of sales, whether it's working with head of product, just to understand performance in different aspects and different dimensions, the head of marketing. I think we definitely, are seen as equal partners in that journey.
That's awesome. That's great to know. So moving on to the next question, and Brian, I'll start with you and then Praniti and actually Brian and then Anisha and then Praniti. I'll change the order this time. Okay, so is data analytics in your purview? So do you have that function under you as an organization? And if so, how does your team support go-to-market intelligence for successful business outcomes? What are some of the challenges you have seen now? Also, you can bring up any in your past lives, what data quality challenges that you have experienced or faced, and how did you address them or do plan to address them at your current job?
That's a really rich question with a lot of different ways to go. But so first of all, yes, the data team does report into business technology. And as far as driving go-to-market efficiencies, this is where I think between the product side of the house and driving product analytics, excuse me, and then improving go-to-market activities. I mean, these are one of the core tenets of a good data team is to really drive insights at the highest level to ensure efficiencies or customer intimacy or just understanding how your product is purchased. And to make sure you're servicing your customers at the end of the day and the business functions. So it's really critical. Now, the challenge for any data team really is just it's an insatiable appetite, right? There's always things you could get done, and just trying to prioritize in building a strong business engagement. That is the biggest challenge. Everyone is a data company. Not everyone is necessarily a tech company, but everyone is a data company. And the way you're going to have a competitive advantage is understanding the data that is in your hands. And it's a journey. So the first step, honestly, is to get that right data program in place with the right governance and democratizing the ability for the business to look at the data in a way that's useful for them. And that can be really challenging because you've got to get the right governance model in place. You got to get the right enterprise data warehouse in place, the pipelines. and get an agreement that these are truly the single sources of truth that you're going to run the business on. And that is a lot easier said than done because everyone has different interpretations of data. And you can really, it's about that engagement side of the house. So this is just as true with any sort of large program or project. There's a maturity life cycle that occurs. So, you know, at GitLab over the last 2 years, we've been working really hard to get those trusted data models to a state where they truly are trusted and agree on single sources of truth. Of course, quality is going to be one of the next things you have to tackle to make sure that that it truly is trusted. And that's a continuous effort, you know, whether you want to take on master data management or something like that. At the end of the day, you got to break it down into bite-sized chunks where you really are focused on the quality of the data and making sure that deep understanding of it. And then you can start your data science program and really getting some propensity models in place to really take it to the next level around really understanding what those signals are. And in this case, for go-to-market, really what the signals are to understand, you know, are your customers using the product? Or do you have a trial, much deeper nurture campaign, making sure that your SDR team, as an example, is focused in the right area, or making sure that your account executives are focused in the right area. Those are some things that I think about that have that really helped over the last 2 years to have that mindset. And
yeah, we all know how. Right. Yeah, it does. And I think we all know how interesting our Salesforce data can be. So you talked about MDM and data governance. That's a great thing. So we just started our journey at ZoomInfo on the data governance and MDM side. So curious to know that, is that something that you already started on your MDM journey at GitLab, or something you're considering?
Yeah. We don't use the phrase MDM today necessarily, even though we are doing some elements. I mean, if you say MDM, that can connotate a really large exercise. So right now we're just focused on some basic data quality initiatives, and really just start building it into our DNA of like, okay, I want to understand the data. We're always going to make continuous improvements, and that could be in any data set really. So this is the year that we're going to be hiring individuals in the data team that are really focused on just data quality. So we have our data engineering folks, we've got our data analytics team, and then we've got our front end team that's focused on the presentation layer. And now we're going to be focusing on data quality. That's going to be the next step to really take it to the next level.
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Brian. So Anisha, again, just to repeat the question, is data analytics under your purview? What are some of the key data quality challenges that you've faced now or in the past? And how do you plan to or have addressed in these challenges?
Yeah, so yeah, data is under my purview. To be clear, specifically data engineering, the visualization layer, making sure the infrastructure is available, performant, all of that. We have power users of data, like analytics folks that sit within the various functions that also leverage the platform we provide, but we do have responsibility for the overall platform. I think in terms of challenges, Brian touched upon this a little bit, but I think one of the things you're seeing with more modern sort of IT architectures, where you have a lot of best of breed point solutions, whether it's Salesforce and others, deployed, is the proliferation of data in so many places, and having to then consciously think about the data architecture and where your source of truth resides and how do you synchronize data across different systems. And I would extend it to say it goes beyond just sort of traditional IT or internal facing systems to your product, right? With sort of, as you think about creating cutting edge customer experiences, our customers don't distinguish or delineate an experience they have in product often from the experience they have when they call into a call center or when they log a support ticket, right? And so ensuring that you have a comprehensive view of customer activity and understanding where they are either in their journey with you or what their pain points are as they're interacting with you requires insights not only from your traditional sort of IT systems, but really from your products as well. And so that's a lot of what we've been focused on, is sort of aggregating both product level data as well as internal business system data, and then also surfacing that not just in traditional sort of BI reporting constructs, but also creating a platform for actionable insights that our various operations teams can take, or actually surfacing it back into a customer-facing portal that might live in a product, for example. So I think the lines are getting very blurred between what's considered like IT systems and what are like really product features. And therefore, it really underscores the need around quality and good quality data, right? And so we are, just like you are, in the middle of launching an MDN program, and completely agree with Brian that could be many things, but we are very focused initially on customer data mastering and quality and cleanliness and aggregation of attributes needed there, that we can serve up some specific use cases we have in mind.
Yeah, I agree. I think starting with the basic ones, just customer and products, is where we're starting redefining system of truth. And yeah, it is a journey for sure. Perfect. Thank you so much. Praniti, what are your thoughts around data quality? I mean, I know a lot working with you and for you, but what are your thoughts, if you'd like to share here, on data quality issues, and have you addressed in the past, and do you plan to address at your current job?
Now this just brings back, memories from last year and doing MDM multiple times specifically around our customer data management systems at Conga. So I think it's so very similar to Anisha and Brian. Let me just round it out by first just setting some context around our team. So we have a very similar structure. We are, in IT, we are in charge on the data platforms. We look after the infrastructure. We do a lot of the data engineering, a lot of the analysis. However, we also have a ton of self-serve that occurs. So we do have, to Anisha's point, a lot of folks that sit in the business that are self-serving. And that goes to an important point of understanding and aligning on data. Everybody that's self-serving, do we have a good governed data model in place so we're not coming up with different numbers? This tends to occur over and over again at companies, and this is one of the challenges that comes up with data quality. I mean, there's another challenge that Anisha mentioned. She talked about data fragmentation, the fact that it's everywhere. You got to really build a strong pipeline and aggregation of data. But the larger challenge, in my opinion, is really around having the alignment that we want good quality data. You always see head nods when you say something like that. Everybody's like in agreement. Yes. Everybody wants to go for it and say, yeah, of course we need good quality data. But actually executing to good quality data requires a ton of messaging, in many cases, full business process overhaul. Sometimes we're not even collecting the data we want to report on, right? So the business process overhaul, in my opinion, and getting to that clean master data is one of the most difficult challenges in data reporting. I also think that it's important to sort of crawl, walk, run on the data side. While we all want to get to the more fun stuff of ML and predictive, I think you have to start with the methodology of crawl, walk, run, go through it in stages, make sure we're able to sort of look at our past, look at our present, and then tend to look at our future. And really organizing your team around that is super important.
Totally agree. And I think simple things, we have to draw a balance between enabling our salespeople versus what we can collect before and after and during the sales cycle in the Salesforce instance. And starting with, as you said, crawl, walk, just the definitions, like what does ACV mean in finance? What does ACV mean in sales? Data dictionary. Yep. Perfect.
Yeah.
Totally
agree.
And
I think you mentioned about GTM, and just to touch on the GTM aspects. I think everyone's goal is to try to get their arms around the full customer journey. And when I think about crawl, walk, run, this is another thing that was important. Our first task was to really there's the product insights that we have the customer support insights, but really one of the most challenging items in the GTM space is, attribution of the touch points. How do you attribute the right items to get to those milestones and the outcomes? So what really made a lead convert over into an opportunity? And you have to get into the heads of the business, right? To understand how they're perceiving those touch points. How should we actually create a multi-channel attribute system? And so we've just started some of our go-to-market journey around, especially the lead attribution model, and it's fantastic. We're doing a lot of work around social and media and gated and ungated content, and how do you see that converting over and even sort of moving a lead into an opportunity milestone. So it's been interesting, but one of the things that highlights is being close to the business.
Yes.
Right? So you really have to have sort of a one team approach on that. So you understand the context as much. And this is where the analysts come in.
Totally agree. It is definitely a business process overhaul. Like we're going through our attribute-based SKU model and our whole pricing, discounting. Oh, it just deja vu. It just comes all back to from Conga now here at ZoomInfo. But yes, it is very much so.
Our last 2 years.
Exactly. So this is great. Thank you so much. So Anisha, over to you next. My next question is, if a young organization is listening, where should they start when it comes to enabling a data-driven organization? And what are some of the key data insights that come to your mind that will help drive revenue decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think, encouraging use of data to make business decisions is the first thing, right? Encouraging a culture where that is the question you ask, which is, what does the data say? Not what I feel, not what I think. What does the data say? And then you work backwards from, do you have the data to know what it says? Have you instrumented your processes to capture the data you need to assess, right? A lot of fast-growing sort of SaaS growth companies, including where I am right now with Toast, there's a lot of appetite for experimentation and testing into things. And the only way you can really support that work sort of in a meaningful way is to make sure you're capturing good data through that process, right? So asking the question around, like, what does the data say? What does it tell us? And therefore what decisions or what our decision options are is like a good place to start, building that culture of data. And then certainly from an IT point of view, start thinking early about things like data quality, right? The rush is always to put a system in place, and we all have the same usual suspects in the systems in place, whether it's the Salesforce, it's the NetSuite, it's the Workdays. I mean, pick your usual like top 2 or 3 SaaS providers in any space. We probably have them all deployed, and it does the thinking around, well, but what do we do with the data? How do we connect the data between these systems? How do we keep them synchronized? How do we ensure quality? How do we get common definitions of data? I think the earlier you can start having these conversations and build a culture around that being the norm, the easier it is. In my experience, data projects get exponentially more expensive to do the bigger you get, right? And so whether it's putting things around data quality or, even a data lake or a data warehouse or a data lake house, pick your favorite term, poison, whatever. It all gets much more complicated and expensive as you get bigger. And so I think starting early with thinking not just about the systems you need, but what data will inform decisions as your, both the health of a process as well as business decisions coming out of it, I think, and putting that mindset in early is what I would advocate for.
Makes sense. And do you categorize metrics, like whether it's, revenue or value metrics, and then you have operational data that'll help drive the org health and things like that? Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense. Thank you. Brian, again, I just wanted to repeat the question. If a young organization is listening, where should they start when it comes to enabling a data-driven organization? And what are some of the key insights that come to your mind that'll help them drive revenue decisions?
Yeah, so my last 3 companies have been all pre-IPO, early startups. And first I'm going to echo what Anisha says. The sooner you can get to good governance and a good understanding of what your data program is, it'll be a lot less expensive than waiting. So the first thing I think of, though, is really around marrying the marketing, the sales data, and the financial data into a single source of truth that everyone can agree on. You're going to get major efficiencies as an organization when you can get those 3 groups just to agree upon a single data set to make business-driven decisions. So really around that sales funnel aspects of, on the marketing side, what your lead generation looks like. Do you have marketing qualified leads, and are they flowing into a sales sales organization, at the end of the day, are you getting efficiencies and making sure that cohort analysis is an example, and really is that going to drive revenue for the company? I think that's really the area to start with. And from like becoming a public company as an example, you need to do that anyways, because you're going to be in a situation where, of course, you need to be able to have good financial metrics. They need to be auditable, and you're going to have to meet a bunch of compliance needs, especially things around non-GAAP metrics that you may want to continue to present in a financial way. Those would be the areas that I really would focus in first, and that's getting agreement from those three organizations. This is truly the data we're going to work with, and that we all agree this data is accurate. And then eliminating sort of, my data is better than your data, and just getting everyone on that same page. Once you get some of those things down, then you can start doing probably the more fun things with more testing, more A/B sort of activity, and really starting to get down to the details of go-to-market efficiencies and real metrics around like how are we doing. But if you don't get that right governance in place and you don't get that right trust in that model to begin with, you're going to become spinning your wheels. So that's the first step I would really recommend anyone start with.
So do you have, and this is just out of curiosity, do you ever recommend, since you have a lot of, you've been in a lot of companies that are early stage companies, so would you say that they make decisions early on, which is going to be their more central system, whether it's going to be a Salesforce run or a CRM run organization or a ERP run organization, that'll determine the system of records around product per se?
Yeah, I think it's a very natural thing for an early company to start with, and it makes sense, right? So you've got, before maybe an IT organization kicks in or a data program kicks in, you're going to have your marketing team, and they're going to be using their various flavors of marketing products. You're going to have your Salesforce CRM system, and the sales team is going to be driving a lot of their decisions in that area. And then you get your finance teams that, trying to put an ERP system in place and a revenue recognition in place, and accounts receivable or billing activities. And as a tech leader, as a data leader, you've got to come in and you've got to help combine all that information to get that next level of data decisions made. And that can be tough because everyone is used to working in their own silo. It's no different than any other business process that you're mapping to, right? When you think about an entire lead to cash business process, these siloed worlds, rightfully so, they're going to focus in on their area first. And it's really, as tech leaders, you've got to come in and connect the dots for everybody and make sure that end-to-end that process is as efficient as possible. 100%. That's the mindset and the responsibility of why we're in the roles we're in.
Totally makes sense. Thanks, Brian. So Praniti, over to you. What are your thoughts around how to enable a young organization to be data-driven in making revenue decisions?
And I think Brian and Anisha have touched on most of the areas. And just to sort of build on that, they talked about fragmentation of data. I think Anisha just talked about this, where you have data in all of these different locations. You just asked a follow-up question that I thought was really interesting. I don't think you can make every decision at the forefront as you're trying to lay down the foundation. And that's where, as Brian mentioned, an IT leader or the IT team's responsibility is to come in and say, how do we make sense of this data that is sitting in 4 different systems? In some cases, this is where it comes back to, you've got to do some business process transformation, we've got to make some changes. But the goal is to aggregate this data. The goal is to get high quality, good quality data. Anisha also talked about the data governance early. We have to start really early. You really can't be running behind the business on this. It needs to be ahead of the business. If we have good data governance set up early around, for example, and this is close to our heart, how do you govern customer accounts within Salesforce? How do you create new accounts? And these are very simple processes, yet very key processes for good customer hygiene, good customer data and the hygiene around it. We've got to start early. So those were the two pieces that I heard from both Brian and Anisha, and I echo both of them 100%. The other piece is also really starting a data team within IT. A lot of the times you come into young businesses and they have this dispersion of data talent across the organization, and we don't have that singular platform. We don't have the same data definitions, and really sort of bringing that together early to lay that foundation for maturing towards the data journey.
Agreed. So what are some of the quality metrics or data quality metrics that you think SaaS companies such as yourselves and they can use to help not just benchmark, but also track?
Specific, granular. I mean, you can look at the different types of master data. Obviously, if you look at product and price master, we went through that in a very large manner. What are your outdated SKUs? How are you looking at renewals and what kind of SKUs are being attributed? So you can go as granular as you want in the different master data layers. Similarly, on the customer side of the house, even the employee side of the house, right? What are the pieces of data we're not capturing? What are some of the business processes that we are actually manually updating? What are the contacts that matter? And this is where ZoomInfo comes in, right? Do we have contacts that matter against accounts? So you can really sort of go as deep as you want. I would say, again, this is a crawl, walk, run sort of methodology. We've got to start simple and then start to kind of iterate. You always want to continue iteration.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, go ahead, Anisha.
Sorry, Chetan. I was just going to say, I love thinking about data quality in terms of what you can and cannot do in terms of use cases. Yeah. We talk about quality of contact data. Let's take that one since that's close, near and dear to many people's heart on this call. Can you automatically identify the role the person calling into your call center plays and what customer account they're associated with? Can you do that today automatically? To the employee data, how much can you automate things like onboarding and offboarding and provisioning and deprovisioning because your employee data is solid? Like these are the use cases, the one that we haven't talked about so much in the GTM space that's super interesting to me that we're focused on is how much product-led growth can you enable? And PLG cannot be done without good quality data because by definition, it takes humans out of the interaction process. And if you really want to enable things like PLG, which a lot of companies are thinking about how to do, you cannot do that without good quality data. So I like to think about data quality in terms of the use cases you're able to enable in your organization or not, right?
Yeah, account deduping, firmographics. I mean, that is also something that, it's been a major challenge in a lot of companies that we've been in. So totally agree. Yeah, I think PLG is a big one for us too. I think that's a good one. So I need to have a special offline session with you now, Anisha, on that. Thank you. So I know we're 20 minutes before we close, but I wanted to have a couple more. I wanted to pick your brain on a couple more topics. So I wanted to see, this time, Brian, I'll start with you, is what are some of your priorities for the new fiscal year, and how do you see taking your org to the next level, when it pertains to GitLab? What's on your roadmap?
Yeah. So specifically on the data side of the house, we kind of touched on it earlier, but it really is around developing a quality program that doesn't feel too daunting for the business to digest. We are going to start some feedback loops really, and just start to, a really simple example, right, is making sure that our customer identifier is mapped throughout the entire, ecosystem, right, in Salesforce and Zora, in our fulfillment world as well. And I know it sounds super basic, but that's where you have to start. You got to really start with some really simple, important data quality metrics across the board. And the other thing I would just mention is that it really starts this sort of we call it a dual flywheel approach. We talk about it on the development side, but it really rings true on the data side as well. So as you start to make improvements from one system to the next, and you start identifying areas of data quality issues that need to be fixed, You fix those, and that will unearth other areas. And you kind of get this whole ecosystem going back and forth between, say, maybe your product data and your go-to-market systems as well. And that's another way we're going to be looking at it is, if we want to understand how our product is being used, we may be creating some data sets in our enterprise data warehouse. And then it's also our responsibility to go back to product and say, hey, these are some missing elements that just aren't built into the product. And then you can start to map all the way through and like, okay, if we had those elements, we better data quality, that then will learn into product qualified leads that go into a marketing qualified lead and really sort of enriching that environment over and over again. So it's around quality, it's around better product analytics. And then the other thing that we're going to be focusing on this year is really driving our data science model and really understanding different propensity models, and understanding that are we investing the right money in the right areas? So that could be understanding if a customer maybe they're underutilizing, right? So we don't want them to churn, so we're going to give them a little extra effort. Understanding when a free user uses our product and when they're likely to benefit from using the next feature, a paid product. So those are the three areas: understanding product analytics, understanding the data science models, and understanding our quality feedback loops so that we just get better and better quality metrics throughout the entire system and mapping that to the process, whatever major business process.
That's great to know. I'd be curious to understand, just a follow-up question on that one, especially on the data science piece. So when do you think the data team is mature enough, or the company is mature enough to get to the AI ML piece before we say, okay, now we've got our models, we've got our visualization layer, all using the models, and we're ready to go?
That's a great question. And when we started talking about data science at GitLab, I think it's been maybe 18 months ago. And I remember very specifically talking to the person who is a data leader at GitLab. And we were saying, if we start to bring in a data scientist today, this is about 18 months ago, we don't have the right governance in place. We don't have the right quality. We don't have the models, the trusted data to really make that particular data science program successful. So you do need to be really thoughtful around, like, are we ready to do this yet? And until you get that governance and you get everyone feeling good about the trusted data that you are providing, I'd say you might be jumping the gun if you try to get those data science propensity models in place. So once we felt good that we could get that entire go-to-market funnel, we're all in agreement, this is how we're going to be looking at this data. Then the next step, about 6 to 9 months ago, was where we're going to start this real data science journey. And that's the fun part. That's when things get really exciting, when you're actually able to mine the data and really understand, oh, this is what this means. And then you get to test those models, and then you get to go back and tune them and do them again. So the data team right now at GitLab is having a ton of fun because you really start to map out the value and all the work that has been done over the last 24 months, at least for us.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that's what Anisha was saying, actionable insights, and when do you get to that? And I know the data team in my organization is also itching to get to being a data scientist, but I think we need to assess and where the org is. So moving on to you, Anisha, back to you. What are your thoughts? What are some of your priorities for this year? And how do you plan to take Toast to its next level of maturity?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to data priorities, echoing what Brian said, data quality is a big focus. As I mentioned, we are doing some work around MDM. And we are in the effort to not boil the ocean, trying to start with specific use cases or pain points we want to address. I mentioned having good quality contact data, good customer hierarchy, good account hierarchy. And what that unlocks, in addition to just having data for data's sake, is actually very specific use cases for our sales and marketing and care teams, right? So having a solid, robust hierarchy enables us to deliver like what we call multi-unit quoting, which is very painful in terms of how we quote restaurants that have multiple locations or restaurant chains that want to buy a product across their whole suite of restaurants, that sort of stuff. So and some very specific use cases that we want to unlock with some of the customer and contact quality related work that we plan to do this year. We also have a lot of focus on a program that we're calling, very boring name, just data triggers. But what we're trying to do is actually use data to enable triggering actions or nudges of our customers at different points in the customer journey where they can get stuck. And we know the only way to scale is to actually do it through automation and systems and data. And so, our first few use cases are focused on activation of customers. So Toast products are both hardware and software. So booking a deal and taking a customer live are two very distinct steps that involve a lot of steps in between, including like scheduling time with a customer, getting hardware shipped, training their employees, getting it live. It's not just selling SaaS software that you just turn on and therefore you can start booking revenue. And so that whole process is a non-trivial step for us, the whole activation, what we call lead to live process. And so there's a lot of steps in there that we feel we can apply, like automated data triggers, where we take a look at the collective set of interactions that the customer has had with us and sort of infer where they are and nudge them to take certain actions and then escalate it to human contact if things are not moving along the journey as expected. So very cool stuff in pre-go live and post-go live as well, in care, where we're putting this very sort of comprehensive data fabric in place that would allow us to aggregate this. We're looking at using a CDP platform and a bunch of other things to allow us to do this. So some pretty cool things that I think, if we can do, that really help scale Toast's operations, because, you can't keep throwing bodies at some of these problems. Yeah. And so we're really looking to enable sort of our customers moving through the journey with one, quality data, and then, aggregating a lot of signals and having timely outreaches that are automated to our customers that then we can funnel to humans as the potential cases get more complicated. So it's a big focus for us this year.
That's a very interesting business model, lead to live. I think very, very interesting, because we don't understand the complexity of, from sale to actually getting them live. So that's good.
Yeah. Thanks, it's definitely more complex than just a straight software sale. So that's part of what we spend a lot of time thinking about, how we optimize.
Makes sense. Yes. Thanks. So Praniti, what are ZScaler's and your specifically key priorities for the year, and how do you plan to take the company to its next level?
Perfect. Thank you, Jane. Now, I know there was a lot of focus on the data side of the house, but, the way I think about our priorities on the IT side is the data slice, but overall, we've got 4 pillars that we are running very, very strongly down the road on, and scaling the business is one of them, which includes a ton of the data work that we are doing. A second pillar, which actually has an immediate impact on our data priorities, is running our own business, and I call that running our own business of IT. Very often we're looking outwards on how do we support the business, how do we support the go-to-market functions, how do we support the finance functions, and these are all really strong use cases. One of the things that I talk about is, how do you tell a business partner that you're going to come help them solve their problems around data and implementing and executing towards the data strategy if we in IT cannot solve it for ourselves. And so that actually is a pretty core focus of ours within IT, is to really drive by data ourselves. And so that's one of our pillars. That's one of our priorities. The other priority is very similar to both Anisha and Brian's, which is data governance and data quality, and thinking about creating a unified data governance team, which is really going to come together between our sales team, between our finance organization, as well as the IT organization, and bringing the team together to have these discussions, which are really impactful to the quality of data. A third priority, which is important, and I think Anisha said throwing bodies at the problem of, throwing bodies towards trying to groom your data, trying to get to that high quality data. And we're really looking at different modes of automation on how can we get to that next level where we really sort of make it a no-touch initiative. So those would be some of the highest priorities on the data side.
Oh, that'd be nice. I was actually curious to know, Praniti, just came to my mind, is how, when you think about data quality and when you start driving data quality, a lot of business users come in the picture of being tested. Do you see any pushback there around testing, validating, who owns the validation and things like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not really as much, I would say, pushback or resistance. It is
Yes,
really sort of a
the perspective.
function of breaking down those silos, I would
Yeah.
say. It's operating on a process level and not trying to operate on a team level, and which is the
Yes.
conversation that we're continuing to have, which is this is an end-to-end process conversation. This isn't really who owns the data, where the data is looked at, and who has permissions to group that data. Let's talk about the process and let's figure out how to do no touch. Like any other customer would come and tell you, listen, I don't really want to work on an update. Why shouldn't it be an automatic update from your product perspective? Similarly, I think as a data team, we really got to think along those lines and actually remove that friction from the process.
Perfect.
So
Makes
I
sense.
wouldn't call it resistance as much as I would call it sort of aligning everybody to a process level conversation.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense. Thank you so much, Praniti. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we have some questions in the audience, I believe. Rebecca, do we have any questions so that we can take those?
Yeah, for sure. We've got a couple already, but audience members, feel free to submit your questions. The Q&A chat box is in the top left corner of your screen, so feel free to submit any more. We do have a couple here. One, Chen, I'm going to direct them to you, and then you feel free to say which panelist you would like to answer, or all of you feel free to answer. But we have one from Shruti in the audience. She's wondering, change management is not easy, and everyone is struggling for time. I'm sure you all can feel that. And what are the best practices that you have learned when it comes to partnering with business stakeholders within that kind of change management lens?
Does anybody feel specifically passionate about it?
I mean, I can take it.
Okay.
I think partnering early and often, right? Like, first of all, from the very inception of the project, there's a funny quote. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but there's something about there's never a successful IT project. It's always a successful business project or an IT failure, right? Like, that's kind of how these projects go. So anything that has a massive change management component, I think it's fool's errand to try and do this as an IT-only project. Like, if you do not have strong business partnership, sponsorship, and demand, frankly, for something like that, then that's hard to do. Now, there is a role, especially around data, where IT plays a role around advocacy. But again, you have to tie it to business outcomes in terms of quality, in terms of enabling use cases that you can't do today because your data is a mess. So there has to be, you have to tie it to business benefit always. But I would say, engaging with especially GTM teams early and often. We just went through a complete CPQ revamp and role that's an example of something that impacts the entire sales organization. And I have to say it's one of the most successful rollouts I've seen in my IT career of more than 25 years. And I think it was because we partnered very closely with the sales enablement team early on. We had everything from early feedback on the design from some of our loudest critics in the sales organization on the tool and what they wanted to see changed. And we involved them early, lots of show and tells in between design build sprints, lots of adjustment, lots of being in their face on a regular basis, and then lots of training and support and white glove support, as we went live. So, I mean, nothing that people in IT don't already know, but definitely involve people early and don't make it an IT-only project.
That is such a good, the great nuggets for all of us. And we're going through a similar kind of a CPQ revamp. And I think being open to, as it pertains to change management, being open to, getting the big boulders forward. And maybe there are small things where you have to negotiate and being open to those, changes and things like that, and being open to not changing in certain areas and being open to, moving whatever we can forward. That is still a step forward. Totally agree with it. Anybody else want to add around change management? All right. Thank you, guys. We're ready to take on one more question, and then we can call it a day.
Awesome. Okay, so I actually personally have this question, I think, and you guys have all touched on it at a high level in a sense, but I think and Nisha kind of jumped into it a little bit getting there early on, but I think when we're talking about data, and maybe this could be selfishly a question for Chetna, but any advice on building or creating trust when you're talking about a one source of data truth in a sense? So I'd love to understand, how do you build that trust in that one source of data and trusting that data as a one source?
Brian, did you want to take that, or Praniti?
Sure, I'll take it.
Okay.
You know, at the end of the day, results matter, right? And so that's that feedback loop. Right? You're gonna get trust as you continue to test the data. So I think, especially in the space that ZoomInfo is in, of course, like, we all want to get quality data sources and bring them into our environment. And the value that those sources of data bring got to be trustworthy. So it's that feedback mechanism that is sort of self-fulfilling. And so much like ZoomInfo has to build a quality data source, we as practitioners of a data program, we need to make sure that the data that we're providing to our end users is going to be trustworthy. And then it starts to build on itself. And so really the proof is in the pudding. And then if you have data that the quality isn't there, or people start to lose trust in that data, that's where things can be really tough, because you got to work doubly hard to get that trust back. I mean, that's true in anything. We're from the context of data, but that could be true in the IT deliverable versus the successful business deliverable, right? So it's something that we as practitioners always have to keep top of mind all the time. Quality is just going to be super important. So that's how I view it. I don't think it's magic by any stretch of the imagination. It's just really good operational practice to make sure that that data is meeting the needs of the business. You'll find out soon enough if it's not meeting the needs of the business. So, back to the governance and working really hard to provide a quality product.
I think this definitely goes back to the governance of the data and alignment on the key data metrics, as well as the definitions of these metrics. It's so important. It's so important. I think we've all been in places where, this is your set of customers. That comes from sales. There's a particular number. And then here is what finance thinks is the number of customers. Totally. And I can say that almost every hand will go up in the room when you ask if that's occurred to you. And that definitely has occurred to me in many different places. And I think the way you solve for that is to really get to a definition, get agreement on a definition, and then make sure your data is reflective of that definition and can bring that outcome together. So good governance, good alignment, those are keys to really gaining trust in the data models that you create.
Agree. No, I think that's a great advice. I definitely agree with all of that. Governance is critical. Alignment is even more critical, because the definitions could vary for any data elements we're talking about, and also system of creation or system of record as you go through the data definitions and dictionary and all of that. So totally agree with you. So we're up at the hour. It's 1 o'clock Pacific time, but thank you so much, all three of you, for taking the time to share your experiences, your knowledge, your skills. And I learned a lot for sure, and I'm sure our audience did too. So thank you for taking the time, and we'll talk soon again. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all. And as just a quick reminder for the audience members, just want to let you know that you will get a recording of this webinar within 48 hours after we conclude today, as well as we have a survey. If you're able to fill out that survey, we would love to hear from you about how this webinar performed for you, content, topic, everything, so that we can produce more in this area. And also, thank you, speakers, for joining us. You guys are fantastic. I learned a lot, and I was really excited to be a fly on the wall with these variety of CIOs, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks,
everybody.